The alarm rang through the bridge of the Valiant Dawn at exactly 300 hours, cutting through the quiet of the night shift. Captain Jake Morrison had been awake for hours, poring over intelligence reports, his mind always spinning with the weight of responsibility. When the sudden shrill of the alarm pierced the silence, his heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. Something was about to change. He stood quickly, tossing aside his datapad and grabbing his uniform jacket. The soft whir of the ship's ventilation system was the only sound that accompanied him as he walked briskly toward the command center. He could already hear the faint hum of crew members springing into action, a ripple of tension in the air. "Report," Jake barked as soon as he stepped onto the bridge. Commander Lisa Grant, his right-hand officer, turned to face him. Her face was pale, tight with worry. "We're picking up a distress signal, sir, from Valaris Prime." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. His breath caught in his throat. Valaris Prime. The home world of the Valeri people, humanity's first real allies among the stars. The same people who had welcomed humanity into the fold of the galaxy, offering friendship and sharing their advanced technology when humanity had first ventured beyond the solar system. Valaris Prime had been a shining example of interstellar cooperation. It had taught humanity how to navigate the stars, how to survive in the void. And now it was under attack. Jake's mind raced. "Put it through," Jake ordered, his voice tight. The communication screen flickered to life. The voice that came through was broken, desperate, and tinged with fear. It was in the Valari language, but the computer's translator immediately converted it to English, the words echoing in the cold silence of the bridge. "This is Valaris Prime calling anyone who can hear us. We are under attack. The Krathel Dominion has entered our system with a massive fleet. Our defense ships were destroyed in the first hour. Orbital stations are falling one by one. They are bombing our cities, targeting hospitals, schools, children. Please, if anyone can hear this, we need help. Please, help us." The transmission ended abruptly, followed by the sounds of explosions, screams, and static. Jake stood frozen, his hands gripping the rail in front of him. The bridge was silent except for the soft hum of the ship's systems. His crew, like him, could feel the weight of the moment. They all knew who the Krathel Dominion were. Ruthless, cruel conquerors who swept through systems, destroying everything in their wake. They were a threat that humanity had managed to avoid until now. Jake looked over at Lisa, her eyes wide with disbelief. She didn't need to say anything. He knew what was running through her mind. The Krathel were a Class A threat. Engaging them could lead to war with the Dominion, a conflict that could engulf the entire galaxy. And yet, Jake knew there was no other choice. "How long to reach Valaris Prime at maximum speed?" Jake asked, his voice calm, almost mechanical. Lieutenant Kevin Brooks, the young man at the navigation station, looked at his readouts and then met Jake's gaze. 72 hours, sir, if we push the jump drives to their limits." "Then we leave in 10 minutes, Jake replied firmly, already moving toward the command console. Lisa stepped forward, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Captain, we don't have orders for this. The Krathel are listed as a Class A threat. If we attack them, we risk starting a war." Jake turned to face her, his eyes hard and filled with resolve. "The Valeri saved us, Lisa. When we first ventured out into the galaxy, we didn't know how to survive. We didn't know which species were friendly and which ones would kill us on sight. The Valeri taught us. They shared their technology, their knowledge. They helped us become who we are today, and now they're being slaughtered. I don't need permission from Earth to do what's right." Jake raised his voice so the entire bridge could hear. "When your friends are in trouble, you help them. Anyone on this ship who doesn't want to come can take a shuttle and leave. But the Valiant Dawn is going to Valaris Prime. We're going to fight." The crew was silent for a long moment. Then one by one they nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. No one moved toward the shuttle bay. Everyone stayed at their posts. Lisa's face softened and she nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, I'll prepare the ship for combat." Jake watched as his crew moved quickly, setting their course and preparing for the battle ahead. His mind raced with the consequences of their actions. Earth Command wouldn't approve. The Galactic Council wouldn't approve. But that didn't matter. They weren't here for approval. They were here to do what was right. As the Valiant Dawn prepared to jump into faster-than-light travel, the communications officer, Patricia Cole, suddenly spoke up. "Captain, I'm picking up additional signals. Other human ships. They're changing course. They're all heading toward Valaris Prime." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He stepped forward to see the readout. "How many ships?" Patricia's fingers flew over the controls. At least 15 so far, sir. More are coming in. 2025, they're still coming. Jake opened a wideband communication channel that would reach all human vessels in the vicinity. His voice crackled through the comms, urgent and raw. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force carrier Valiant Dawn. To all human ships, I know you've heard the distress call from Valaris Prime. I know some of you are civilians. I know some of you have cargo worth more than your life savings. But I'm asking you to come with us. The Valeri need our help. The responses began to pour in immediately. A freighter's captain, Danny Wright, was the first to respond. This is Captain Danny Wright of the freighter Starbound Hope. My ship isn't much, she's not armed, but she's got engines and she can fly. Count me in. Another voice, younger and more nervous, spoke next. Trading vessel Meridian's Edge here. We're carrying medical supplies to the TD colony. The Valeri need medicine more than TD does. We're coming. One by one, other voices joined in, mining ships, exploration vessels, cargo haulers. The human fleet was swelling, not with military ships, but with civilians, volunteers who had no reason to fight except for the deep bond of friendship. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, letting the magnitude of what was happening settle in. He had hoped for a handful of ships, but this was more than he ever imagined. The spirit of humanity, its compassion and unity, was coming through in full force. Thank you, Jake muttered under his breath, his hands gripping the command console. Patricia's voice pulled him back to the present. Captain, we're picking up more ships. There are dozens more on long-range sensors. They're all heading toward Valaris Prime. Jake's throat tightened. His fleet was growing. They weren't alone in this fight. Humanity had come together. We're not alone, Jake said softly to himself. We'll make it through this. The Valiant Dawn lurched as the jump drive powered up, and with a burst of light, they were on their way. As the Valiant Dawn and its newfound allies pushed toward Valaris Prime, the Krathel Dominion's flagship looms ominously over the planet, casting a shadow on the battle to come. The fleet may be growing, but the fight ahead will test their resolve in ways they can't yet imagine. The vastness of space stretched out before Captain Jake Morrison, an endless sea of black speckled with stars. The Valiant Dawn surged forward, its engines pushed to their limits as it sped toward Valaris Prime. Behind them, a growing fleet of human ships followed, a mix of military carriers, civilian freighters, mining vessels, and medical ships. They weren't an army, just a collection of people willing to risk everything to help the Valeri. The distress call had changed everything. No longer was this just another mission for the Earth Defense Force. This was personal. Jake's thoughts constantly returned to the Valeri, the species that had welcomed humanity when they had first ventured into the stars. The Valeri had shared their technology and wisdom, taught humanity how to navigate space, how to form peaceful relationships with other species. The thought of them being slaughtered by the Krathel Dominion was unbearable. Captain, we're approaching the edge of the Valaris system, Lieutenant Kevin Brooks called out from the navigation console, snapping Jake from his thoughts. We'll be there in under 2 hours if we maintain this pace. Jake nodded, his jaw tight. They had pushed the jump drives beyond their limits, and while the ship was holding together, he knew the toll this would take on their systems. But there was no turning back now. He glanced around the bridge at his crew, all of them working in tense silence. Commander Lisa Grant stood near the weapons console, her face set in determination. She hadn't spoken much since the Valiant Dawn had left Earth's orbit, but Jake knew what was on her mind. The same thing that weighed heavily on his. The Krathel were not a species to take lightly. Their warships were formidable, their tactics brutal, but it wasn't just the enemy they had to fear. Earth Command had made it clear. They were acting without permission, and the political fallout could be catastrophic. Captain, I'm picking up more signals. Patricia Cole, the communications officer, spoke up from her station. Other human ships, just as we expected. They're coming in from all over. Some of them are civilian vessels, small freighters, cargo haulers, but they're all heading toward Valaris Prime. Jake turned to look at her, feeling a flicker of hope rise within him. How many? 50, no, make that 60 ships now, Patricia said, her voice full of surprise. They're coming from every corner of human space, outer colonies, inner worlds. Some are military, others civilian, but they're all making their way here. Jake's chest tightened with a mixture of gratitude and awe. The Valeri had always been humanity's greatest allies, and it seemed that the call for help had spread across human space faster than he could have ever imagined. This wasn't just a military operation, it was a united effort. He stepped forward and tapped the comms system. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Forces Valiant Dawn. To all human ships, I know you've heard the distress call from Valaris Prime. We're about to enter their system, and we need every ship we can get. We're not here for glory, we're here to save our friends. We need your help." The response came quickly, voices crackling over the comm system. "This is Captain Danny Wright of the freighter Starbound Hope. My ship's old and not much to look at, but I've got engines and I'm ready to help. Point me toward the Crathel." "This is the Meridian's Edge, a trading vessel. We're carrying medical supplies, taking them to the TD colony. But we'll bring them to Valaris Prime instead. The Valeri need it more. We're coming." Jake felt his throat tighten as more voices flooded in, each one more determined than the last. A mix of miners, explorers, and merchant ships, each crewed by people who had no obligation to fight, but who saw this as a fight worth joining. It wasn't just about saving the Valeri anymore. It was about standing up against a bully who had terrorized the galaxy for far too long. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words of the crew wash over him. The Valeri had helped them when they had first arrived in the stars, unsure and afraid. Now humanity was answering the call. "This is Captain Brian Foster of the Titan's Wrath. We're a mining ship, but we've got a few weapons. If we can't fight them head-on, we'll distract them. We're in." "I'm with you, Captain," came another voice. "This is the Morning Star. We'll do what we can. Our ship's not much, but we'll keep moving." One by one, more voices joined in, forming a growing chorus of human resolve. This wasn't just a fleet, it was a movement. The call had gone out and humanity had answered. "We're not alone in this," Jake muttered, almost to himself. He looked over at Lisa, who gave him a small, approving nod. "I knew we wouldn't be. These people are our family." Lisa glanced at the tactical display. "Captain, we've got a new contact coming in, something big. Crathel ships, looks like a whole fleet. They're moving toward Valaris Prime." Jake's stomach twisted. The Crathel Dominion was known for their brutal tactics, and if they had entered the system, it meant they were serious about wiping out the Valeri once and for all. He stepped to the console, his fingers flying over the controls. The screen flickered, revealing the massive Crathel fleet. It was even larger than he had feared, dozens of warships, massive capital ships, and thousands of smaller escort vessels. "We won't make it in time to stop them before they hit the planet," Jake said, his voice low. "But we can buy time, we can fight back." The human fleet had come together, but they were still outgunned. These weren't just enemy ships. They were Crathel warships, built for destruction, with weapons far superior to anything humanity had ever faced. The Valiant Dawn might be capable of some impressive firepower, but it wasn't enough to take on this many Crathel ships head-to-head. "Kevin," Jake said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "Plot a course toward the Crathel flagship. We're going to hit them hard, keep them distracted, give the civilians a chance to evacuate." Kevin didn't hesitate. "Aye, sir, plotting course now." Jake turned to the rest of the bridge. "Listen up, everyone, this is it. We're going to hold the line for as long as we can. The Valeri are counting on us. Every minute we buy is another chance for civilians to escape. We can do this. We have to." The crew nodded, determination flashing in their eyes. The ship's systems hummed as they prepared for what was coming next. Just as they neared the edge of the Valaris system, Jake's comm panel lit up. "Captain," Patricia said, her voice tight with emotion, "I'm picking up a signal from Earth Command. They're demanding you return immediately." Jake's fists clenched. "We're not turning back," he said, his voice like steel. "Not now, not when our friends are in trouble." As the fleet approaches the Crathel fleet, a massive shockwave erupts from the Crathel flagship, its weapons powering up. The battle is about to begin, but it's unclear if humanity's courage will be enough to save Valaris Prime from total destruction. The vast expanse of space around Valaris Prime was darker than ever, tainted by the shadows of the massive Crathel fleet. Jake Morrison stood in front of the command console, watching as the Crathel flagship, an imposing wedge-shaped vessel the size of a small moon, loomed over the planet. The remaining Valeri cities below were burning, their lights flickering in the smoke-filled atmosphere. "Crathel fleet is moving into position," Lieutenant Kevin Brooks reported from his station. His voice was strained, every word weighed with tension. "They're gearing up to bombard the planet." Jake's heart sank. There was no time to waste. The human fleet, though rapidly growing, was still vastly outnumbered. The Crathel ships were massive, their weapons designed for sheer destruction. but humanity wasn't about to stand by and let them wipe out a peaceful species. "Get us into position," Jake ordered. "We'll charge them head-on. The civilians need to have a clear route to evacuate." Lisa Grant, his trusted second-in-command, approached. "Captain, this is madness. We're outgunned. If we engage them directly, we'll lose half our fleet before we even get close." Jake's eyes never left the tactical screen. "We don't have a choice, Lisa. We're not here to win a battle. We're here to buy time." The crew moved swiftly, every officer and crew member focused on the task at hand. They had no delusions about the odds. The human ships, many of which were civilian vessels, were ill-equipped for a battle of this magnitude, but they were united in a common purpose. They were fighting for a people who had given humanity its first chance in the stars. They were fighting for friends. "All ships, this is Captain Morrison," Jake's voice rang over the fleet-wide comms. "We're going in hard. The Valiant Dawn will lead the charge. Stick close to us, stay in formation, and keep your distance from the Krathel flagship. We can't afford to get caught in its crossfire." The fleet moved forward, each ship positioned behind the Valiant Dawn, their engines glowing as they accelerated toward the Krathel lines. The Krathel fleet, sensing the incoming attack, began to shift their massive warships into battle formation, their weapons charging up with terrifying power. "We're coming in hot," Jake muttered, watching the readouts as the enemy fleet prepared to engage. The first wave of fire came from the Krathel flagship. Red beams of energy shot across the dark void, lighting up the space around them. The Valiant Dawn shuddered as one of the beams grazed its shields, but the ship held firm. "Shields holding at 75%, Lisa called out. "But we can't take many more hits like that." "Return fire," Jake ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around him. "Target their engines. If we can disable the flagship, we might stand a chance." The Valiant Dawn's weapons came to life, launching volleys of missiles and energy blasts toward the Krathel ships. The smaller human vessels joined in, firing whatever weapons they had, though their shots barely scratched the surface of the Krathel warships. "We're hitting their shields, but it's not enough," Lisa said, frustration creeping into her voice. Jake knew they needed more. The Valiant Dawn was holding its own for now, but with every passing second, the odds grew worse, and there were still hundreds of Krathel ships on the battlefield. Then the first casualty struck. One of the human patrol boats, a small, unarmed vessel, exploded in a flash of light as it took a direct hit from a Krathel cruiser. Jake's heart clenched. He had known this would happen, but seeing it play out, seeing lives lost so quickly, was a bitter reality. "Starboard shields are down to 40%, sir," Lisa reported. "We need to pull back or we'll lose the ship." Jake clenched his fists. They couldn't pull back. If they did, the Krathel would have free rein to destroy the Valari. The civilian vessels would never make it out. They had to keep pushing forward. "Keep pressing forward," Jake ordered, his voice steel. "We've got one shot at this, don't stop." The Valiant Dawn dodged another barrage of fire, but it was clear the ship was taking more damage with each passing minute. The smaller human vessels, despite their lack of firepower, fought with everything they had. The freighter Starbound Hope, piloted by Captain Danny Wright, rammed one of the Krathel cruisers, the old cargo ship's hull cracking under the impact, but managing to disable the Krathel vessel long enough to save a few ships from certain destruction. "Starbound Hope just took out a cruiser," Patricia called out. "They're not giving up." Jake's chest swelled with pride. The crew of the Starbound Hope wasn't a military unit. They weren't even soldiers. They were just people who had heard the call and decided to fight, and now their bravery was turning the tide in small but meaningful ways. But it wasn't enough. The Krathel were too strong. Their fleet was overwhelming. Even with the human ships' valiant efforts, Jake could see the inevitable coming. The Valiant Dawn wouldn't survive much longer under this kind of fire. "Captain," Kevin said, his voice tight with fear. "We've got a Krathel destroyer heading straight for us. It's too close. We won't be able to dodge it." Jake's heart pounded. This was it, the moment he'd dreaded. The Valiant Dawn was the symbol of humanity's defiance, and now it might be lost in the battle. "Evasive maneuvers," Jake shouted. "All hands brace for impact." The destroyer loomed larger on the screen, its weapons primed. The Valiant Dawn swung left, but the Krathel ship matched its movements, staying right on their tail. A flash of light, followed by an explosion, shook the entire ship. The Valiant Dawn lurched to the side, the hull creaking under the strain. "We're taking heavy damage, Captain," Lisa said, her voice grim. Hull integrity is failing. We need to get out of here. Now. Jake gritted his teeth, his mind racing. No, we don't leave. We hold the line. But as he spoke, another explosion tore through the ship's starboard side, sending a cascade of sparks across the bridge. The alarms blared, warning them of imminent danger. "Captain, we can't keep this up," Kevin said, his hands flying over the controls. "The ship's systems are failing. We have to retreat or we'll be destroyed." Jake stood motionless, staring at the Krathel fleet on the tactical display. He could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on him, the weight of the lives lost, the weight of the lives still to be saved. "Get us in close," he said finally, his voice hard with resolve. "If we're going down fighting. All ships focus fire on the Krathel destroyer. We're not giving up." The Valiant Dawn surged forward, throwing everything it had into the attack. The other human ships followed suit, pouring their fire into the Krathel destroyer, pushing forward despite the overwhelming odds. Just as the Valiant Dawn closes in on the Krathel destroyer, a massive explosion erupts from one of the human patrol ships, rocking the fleet. The Valiant Dawn takes another direct hit, and Jake is thrown from his feet, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. The future of the mission hangs in the balance, but in the chaos, a surprise signal comes through. A mysterious new fleet on the horizon, humanity's last hope. The Valiant Dawn was barely holding together. Another explosion had rocked the ship, and now the bridge was bathed in an eerie red light as the alarms screamed louder than ever. The ship's hull groaned in protest, and Jake Morrison felt every shudder beneath his feet as though it were his own body taking the blows. His vision blurred as he pushed himself up from the floor, the gash on his forehead bleeding more than he realized. But there was no time to think about pain, no time to process anything beyond the urgency of the moment. The Valiant Dawn was on the brink of destruction, and so were the Valeri on the surface below. "Captain, we've lost our forward shields," Lisa Grant reported, her voice tight with tension. "Hull integrity at 30%. I don't know how much longer we can stay in the fight." Jake looked at the tactical display, but it was hard to make sense of the chaos. The Krathel fleet was closing in, and despite the human ship's valiant efforts, the odds were still stacked against them. The Valiant Dawn had taken the brunt of the attacks. Its armor was nearly shredded, and many of its systems were down. But despite the overwhelming odds, the fleet hadn't fallen apart. The human ships continued to fight, even if their odds of winning seemed impossible. Jake grabbed onto the command chair, his knuckles white. The entire ship shuddered again as another volley of Krathel fire struck them. "Lieutenant Brooks, how much longer until we reach the Krathel destroyer?" Jake asked, his voice strained. Kevin's fingers flew over the controls, but his response was grim. "We're about to go critical, Captain. The destroyer is just ahead, but at this rate, we'll never make it. We're dead in the water if we don't pull back." The words hit Jake like a blow to the chest. Pulling back wasn't an option. The Valeri were counting on them. The civilians on their ships were counting on them. If they retreated now, the Krathel would finish what they had started, and Valaris Prime would be lost forever. "We're not pulling back," Jake growled, his voice fierce. "We press on, fire everything we've got." But just as Jake's orders were being relayed, a strange transmission interrupted the chaos. The voice that crackled through the communication system wasn't familiar. "Captain Morrison, do you read?" The voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it that demanded attention. "This is Admiral Helen Carter commanding the Earth Fleet." Jake froze, his heart skipped. Helen Carter, he hadn't heard that name in years, but hearing it now, it was like a beacon in the storm. "Admiral Carter," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "Where are you? We're outnumbered. We can't hold them much longer." "We're here," came Carter's reply, "and we're not alone." The comms crackled as a new set of coordinates appeared on the tactical display, and for the first time since the battle had begun, Jake felt a glimmer of hope. The signature of a massive fleet appeared on his screens, a fleet far larger than their own, far more powerful than anything they had imagined. "Admiral," Jake said, his voice thick with disbelief, "how did you—" "We've gathered every ship we could find," Carter interrupted. "The Valiant Dawn did what you had to do. You bought us enough time to get here. We've got reinforcements, Jake, and we're coming in hot, but you need to hold that line for us." Jake could hardly process the words. Reinforcements? Coming in hot? He looked at Lisa and she stared back, eyes wide. Even she seemed unable to believe what she was hearing. "Captain Morrison," Carter continued, We've got Earth's full military fleet. Carriers, destroyers, medical ships, civilian vessels, they've all come. And we're bringing the pain. The Krathel won't know what hit them. Jake took a deep breath, the tension lifting slightly from his chest. The human fleet was coming. It was happening. They weren't alone anymore. We're still taking fire, Jake said, urgency creeping into his voice. Our shields are down. We're losing ships. We'll be there in 5 minutes, Carter replied. Don't lose faith, Jake. You've done the impossible. Jake turned back to the tactical display, now showing dozens of ships appearing from the edge of the Valaris system. Their signatures were unmistakable. The human fleet was massive, their approach swift and deliberate. It wasn't just military power. They had a message to send, and that message was clear. Humanity would not back down. Hold steady, Jake ordered, his voice stronger now. Everyone, this is our final push. We hold them off for 5 more minutes. Do whatever it takes. If we have to go down, we go down together. But we don't let the Krathel take Valaris Prime. The crew of the Valiant Dawn nodded, their faces filled with grim resolve. They had been through hell, and they weren't about to stop now. Kevin, how many ships can we still engage? Jake asked, his hands steady on the console. Maybe 30% of our firepower, Captain, Kevin replied. But the Valiant Dawn is holding up. Barely. Then we make it count, Jake said, his voice unwavering. Everyone fire at will. The Valiant Dawn fired its remaining weapons with all the force it had left. It wasn't much, but it was something. The smaller human ships joined in, every blast a defiance of the odds stacked against them. They fired in unison, creating a distraction, keeping the Krathel fleet engaged just long enough to buy those precious few minutes for the reinforcements to arrive. And then, just as it seemed like the Krathel would break through, the first wave of Earth's reinforcements arrived. The sheer size of their fleet was overwhelming. Dozens of warships, including the flagship dreadnought Fury of Earth, cut through the darkness, their weapons blazing. The Valiant Dawn was no longer alone. Admiral Carter, we've got your back, Jake shouted over the comm, feeling a wave of relief flood his chest. Let's show the Krathel what humanity can do. The Krathel flagship turned its massive guns toward the approaching human fleet, but it was too late. The first volley of fire from the dreadnought Fury of Earth struck the Krathel flagship with the force of a thunderstorm. The Krathel destroyer, the one that had been relentlessly pursuing the Valiant Dawn, exploded in a bright flash, its hull breaking apart in the vacuum of space. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The tide had turned. With the arrival of Earth's reinforcements, the Krathel fleet begins to falter. But just as Jake and the others start to breathe a sigh of relief, a new, unexpected threat emerges, a weapon of unimaginable power, one that could destroy not just their fleet, but the entire system. The battle isn't over yet, and the true test of humanity's resolve is about to begin. The battle had taken a turn, but victory was still a distant hope. The Krathel fleet, reeling from the unexpected reinforcements, faltered for a moment, but they weren't finished. Their forces regrouped quickly, as Jake Morrison had feared. The Krathel were ruthless, and their pride would not let them simply back down. Jake stood at the command console, watching the rapidly shifting tactical display. Human ships, the dreadnought Fury of Earth leading the charge, engaged the Krathel forces head-on, but it wasn't enough. The Krathel ships were massive, each one a fortress of weaponry. They had the firepower to crush any resistance, and Jake knew that even with the fleet's reinforcements, they had to be strategic. They were still outnumbered. But there was one thing the Krathel didn't expect: human ingenuity and sheer determination. Admiral Carter, Jake said into the comms, his voice strained but resolute. We need to push them back, not just for the battle, but for the civilians. We can't let them destroy what's left of the planet. We're on it, Jake, came the reply from Admiral Carter, her voice firm. The civilian ships are beginning their evacuation runs. You need to hold off the Krathel long enough for them to get through. Jake glanced at the tactical display, now filled with tiny blips representing the civilian ships, mostly unarmed cargo vessels, freighters, and medical transports. They were the key to saving the Valari survivors. But the Krathel fleet was closing in, and every minute counted. If the enemy pressed forward, they would destroy the civilian fleet before they could escape. Kevin, can we create a diversion? Jake asked, his mind racing through possible strategies. Kevin Brooks, the young navigator who had proven himself time and again, worked quickly at his console. We've got enough power left to make a push, but it's going to be tight. If we maneuver just right, I think we can force the Krathel to split their forces. Jake's eyes narrowed. Do it. Make them focus on us. Every ship, every civilian needs a chance to escape. As Kevin initiated the maneuver, the Valiant Dawn and the rest of the human fleet broke off from their main formation. The Krathel, caught off guard, turned their weapons toward the threat, opening fire. Energy beams crackled through the void, but the human ships were already moving in unpredictable patterns, keeping the Krathel at bay and drawing them further from the evacuation zone. But it wasn't enough. Jake could feel it. Time was slipping through their fingers, and the Krathel had only been momentarily distracted. Even with their evasive tactics, the human fleet was taking damage, and many of the civilian vessels were still vulnerable. Patricia, Jake called, turning to the comms officer, have we received any signals from the civilian ships? Patricia's fingers flew over the console, her face a mask of concentration. They're on their way, Captain. Some of the smaller ships have already made it past the Krathel lines, but others, they're being targeted. The medical ships are taking hits. Jake's stomach tightened. He knew the risks. These were human civilians, just ordinary people, farmers, traders, engineers. Some of them weren't prepared for this kind of conflict. But they had answered the call, and now they were paying the price. Get those ships through, Jake said with fierce determination. We've got this, just buy them more time. Suddenly, a new wave of fire slammed into the Valiant Dawn, rattling the ship from stem to stern. The entire ship groaned under the strain, and alarms blared. We've lost portside power, Lisa Grant called out from her station. Hull breach on deck 7. We're losing air pressure in some sections. Jake gritted his teeth, the weight of the situation pressing on him like a vice. Maintain course. We're not stopping. We're not leaving anyone behind. As the Valiant Dawn continued its diversion, the civilian ships began to make their escape. A convoy of mining ships, cargo haulers, and even a few personal transports broke through the Krathel lines, dodging enemy fire and heading toward the planet's atmosphere, where the survivors waited at evacuation points. But Jake's relief was short-lived. Captain, look, Kevin shouted, his voice filled with urgency. We've got incoming. A new threat had appeared on the horizon, another Krathel battle group, much larger than anything they had seen before. The human fleet had been so focused on holding the first wave back that they hadn't noticed the secondary force moving into position. Admiral Carter, we've got another fleet coming in, Jake reported, his heart sinking. How much longer until we can get the civilians through? We're doing everything we can, Jake, Carter replied. The evacuation is nearly complete. Just hold on. We're sending every available vessel to assist, but we need you to hold the Krathel back for a little longer. Jake felt his blood run cold as the Krathel ships grew closer. The new fleet was enormous, more than twice the size of the initial group, their warships massive and bristling with weaponry. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a reckoning. The Krathel had realized that humanity wasn't going to back down, and now they were bringing everything they had to bear. Get the Dreadnought Fury into position, Jake ordered. We need to buy more time. If we don't, everything we've done, everything we've sacrificed will be for nothing. But even as the Dreadnought Fury moved into position, the enemy's guns powered up. We've lost the Mercury's hope, Patricia said softly, her voice tight with emotion. It was one of the last unarmed civilian ships. It didn't make it through. Jake's breath caught. He knew they couldn't save every ship, but the thought of so many innocent lives lost stung harder than he expected. The Mercury's hope had been a small freighter, but it carried hundreds of refugees. Get the rest of the ships out of here, Jake commanded. Now, every second counts. Make sure they know where to go, coordinate with the ground teams, the Valeri won't be left behind. With the remaining civilian ships in the clear, Jake felt a bittersweet satisfaction. The evacuation wasn't perfect. They'd lost ships and they'd lost people, but they had saved many, and that was enough for now. But just as he allowed himself a brief moment of respite, another alarm sounded. Captain, Kevin called out. The Krathel are targeting the surface. They're going to destroy the evacuation sites. They won't let us leave. Jake's eyes went wide with horror. The Krathel had escalated. They were no longer just attacking ships. They were going after the very lifeblood of their mission. The survivors on the surface of Valeris Prime, the last remnants of a people who had trusted humanity, were about to be slaughtered. Admiral Carter, Jake called out, his voice shaking with urgency. We need to stop them. They're going to wipe out the last of the Valeri. Jake, we don't have enough firepower to take on that kind of weaponry head-on, Carter replied, her voice equally tense. "We need to move now. There's a fleet of backup vessels arriving. Get those last survivors to safety." The situation had gone from dire to desperate. They were facing not only the Krathal's ruthless military might, but also a race against time to save the last of the Valeri. Jake's heart was pounding in his chest as he made his final decision. He had given everything to this mission, his ship, his crew, and now his very soul. "We're not letting them die. We fight until the last ship is in the air." With the fate of Valaris Prime hanging in the balance, the Krathal bring out their ultimate weapon, an orbital bombardment system capable of destroying entire cities in a single strike. The human fleet has no choice but to go all in, knowing that one misstep could cost them everything. The final battle for survival is about to begin, and the outcome is uncertain. The sky over Valaris Prime was burning. The once blue planet, home to one of humanity's greatest allies, was now an inferno. Across the surface, the last remnants of the Valeri civilization were being wiped out by the unrelenting Krathal bombardment. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant Dawn, his heart heavy as the tactical display flashed with images of collapsing cities, rising smoke, and explosions that lit up the dark sky like fireworks of death. The civilian ships had made it out, but the survivors on the surface were still at the mercy of the Krathal. The battle was still raging in space. The human fleet, bolstered by reinforcements from Earth, fought valiantly against the Krathal, but it was clear the Dominion had one last card to play. Their ultimate weapon, an orbital bombardment system capable of leveling entire cities in seconds. If the Valiant Dawn and the rest of the human fleet didn't act fast, it would be too late. "Kevin," Jake said, his voice low and tense, "can we take down that orbital weapon?" Kevin Brooks, his fingers flying across the navigation console, looked up with grim determination. "We've got a chance, Captain, but it's going to take everything we've got. The system is heavily defended by Krathal destroyers. If we go in, we'll be flying blind." "Then we make it work," Jake replied. "This is the only shot we have. We get in, disable their weapon, and we get those survivors to safety. Earth Command's reinforcements can handle the rest." Lisa Grant stepped forward, a serious expression on her face. "Captain, we've lost so many ships already. If we make a direct assault, we'll lose the Valiant Dawn too." Jake turned to her, meeting her gaze with unwavering resolve. "We're already losing. If we don't stop that weapon, everything we've done will be for nothing. The Valeri need us. We made a promise." Lisa didn't hesitate. She nodded, understanding the gravity of his decision. "Understood, sir." "Patricia," Jake continued, turning to his communications officer, "open a channel to the fleet. We're going in. Tell them to hold the line for as long as they can." The comms crackled to life as Patricia relayed the order. Within seconds, the voices of human commanders echoed through the ship's intercom. "This is Commander Paul Fisher of the Resolute. We'll cover you, Captain. Just get in there." A series of other ships chimed in with their support, including freighters, medical ships, and even a few exploration vessels. They weren't soldiers, but they were willing to fight, to sacrifice everything for a world that wasn't their own. Jake felt a lump in his throat, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. "Thank you. Let's make sure the Valeri don't die in vain. Move out." With a coordinated effort, the Valiant Dawn led the charge, its engines roaring to life as it surged toward the Krathal orbital weapon. The fleet followed behind, maneuvering into position to provide cover, but the odds were still stacked against them. The Krathal destroyers blocked their path, their massive guns aimed at the incoming ships, but the humans pressed forward with a desperation they hadn't known they possessed. Jake clenched his jaw as the first blast from the Krathal hit the Valiant Dawn. The ship shuddered under the impact, the lights flickering as the shields absorbed most of the force. But the damage was still considerable. The Valiant Dawn could take only so many hits before it became a floating wreck. "Shields at 40%, Captain," Lisa called, her voice strained. "We're not going to last much longer at this rate." Jake gritted his teeth. "Push through, we don't stop, the weapon has to go." Kevin's voice cut through the noise. "I've got a lock on their orbital weapon. It's just ahead behind their destroyers. We need to go under their formation and get around their shields." Jake nodded sharply. "Take us in, Kevin, make it count." The ship banked hard to the left, ducking under a barrage of fire from a Krathal destroyer. The Valiant Dawn dipped into a high-speed evasive maneuver, and Jake felt the ship tilt beneath him as Kevin threw it into a sharp turn. They were close now, close enough to see the massive Krathel orbital weapon, a massive glowing cannon perched on the edge of the Valaris atmosphere. "Targeting system locked," Kevin reported. "But we're not going to get a clean shot with all these ships in the way." Jake's eyes narrowed. "We don't need a clean shot. We need to take out their power core, go for their generators." Kevin adjusted the ship's trajectory, bringing them closer to the heart of the Krathel defense. With the rest of the fleet still engaged in a desperate struggle with the Krathel destroyers, there was no time to waste. The Valiant Dawn fired its remaining weapons at full power, taking out a few smaller enemy ships that were in the way. The energy cannons slammed into the shields of the Krathel weapons' outer defenses, causing massive sparks to fly from the structure, but it wasn't enough to disable the weapon completely. "Another hit coming in," Lisa shouted. Jake didn't flinch. "Keep firing, Kevin, give us one more shot, we're close." The Valiant Dawn fired again, this time targeting the exposed core of the weapon. The blast hit dead center, and for a split second everything was still. Then the explosion came. A massive shockwave rippled through space, sending a blinding flash of light across the battlefield. The Krathel orbital weapon erupted, its energy core destabilizing in a violent display of fire and debris. For a moment there was silence. Captain Kevin's voice came through the stunned quiet. "We did it. The weapon's gone." Jake allowed himself a brief exhale, but there was no time to celebrate. The Krathel fleet was still out there and the evacuation wasn't complete. "We've still got work to do," Jake said, his voice steady once more. "Get the survivors out now." The remaining human ships, despite their own damage, began the final push toward the surface of Valaris Prime. The civilian ships had made it, but now the real work began. The Krathel were retreating, but they weren't done yet. And the Valari, what was left of them, still needed a safe haven. Suddenly a transmission crackled through. It was Admiral Carter again. "We've got your back, Jake. The remaining Krathel forces are in retreat. We're finishing the job." Jake closed his eyes briefly, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The fight wasn't over, but they had made it through the worst. The evacuation would succeed, and the Krathel, for the first time in history, would know what it felt like to be outmatched. "Thank you, Admiral. Let's finish this." The final wave of human ships dove toward Valaris Prime, landing in the shattered cities, picking up the last survivors from the ashes of the burning world. It was a long road ahead, but humanity had shown that when a friend was in need, they would answer, no matter the cost. As the last ships return to space, a new message arrives. A shadowy figure in the distance, a fleet that wasn't Krathel. A new power, one not seen before. And their intentions are unclear, but they know one thing: humanity's actions have sparked something that will change the galaxy forever. The Valiant Dawn drifted in the cold emptiness of space, its once pristine hull now battered and scarred from the brutal battle with the Krathel. The battle for Valaris Prime was over. The Krathel had retreated, their orbital weapon destroyed, and the last remaining survivors were safely on their way to Earth's outer colonies. But even as the human fleet regrouped, Jake Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was just beginning. He stood on the bridge, staring out at the remains of Valaris Prime, a planet once full of life, now reduced to ashes. The Valeri were gone, or at least the majority of them. Millions had been saved, but Jake knew that those who perished would never be forgotten. The Valiant Dawn had been their lifeline, and now it was a symbol of loss, of sacrifice, but also of something greater. "Captain," came Lisa Grant's voice, soft but filled with respect. "The fleet's securing the perimeter. We've got civilian ships heading toward the rescue zones. The Valeri will be safely relocated soon." Jake nodded without turning around. "Good, they deserve it." "Earth Command's been trying to reach you, sir," Lisa added. "They want a debriefing. They've sent several messages." Jake didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure what he could say to them. Earth Command had been a distant observer during the early stages of the crisis, sending only words of caution, warnings about the potential consequences of engaging with the Krathel. They hadn't been the ones to act. The decision had been his, along with his crew, his fleet of civilians, and the unspoken bond that connected them all. They had acted not out of obligation, but out of something deeper: friendship. Humanity had stepped up for a species that had once opened their doors and welcomed them. That wasn't something he could easily explain to Earth Command. "Put them through," Jake said, finally breaking his silence. "Let's get this over with." The screen on the command console flickered to life, and Admiral Helen Carter's face appeared. She looked exhausted, her uniform singed, and the background behind her showed the familiar chaos of a command center filled with soldiers, techs, and officers working tirelessly. But behind her stern gaze, Jake could see something else, something he didn't expect: pride. "Jake," Carter said, her voice firm but soft, "you and your crew did the impossible. You saved a species. You kept the galaxy from falling into chaos. I don't think anyone here will forget what happened at Valaris Prime." Jake stared at her, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. He wasn't used to praise, not like this. He had simply done what was right. He had made a choice, and though it had cost him, it had been worth it. "The cost was high," Jake said, his voice heavy. "Too high. We lost a lot of good people. Starbound hope. Danny Wright, he didn't make it." Carter's expression softened. "I know, and will honor every soul lost in this conflict, but you didn't just stop a war, you've sent a message." Jake raised an eyebrow. "A message?" Carter nodded, leaning forward slightly. "Yes, a message to the galaxy. The Krathel thought they could push humanity around, make us bow to their will, but instead they've learned something important today. We're not afraid to stand up for what's right, even against impossible odds, even when no one else is watching." Jake exhaled slowly, looking down at his hands. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight. He wasn't used to thinking about the broader implications of their actions. He had simply wanted to save his friends, the Valari, but Carter's words resonated with him. He turned back to her. "What happens now?" Carter sat back in her chair, her expression turning serious. "We're taking stock of the situation. Earth is sending a fleet to help with the reconstruction of Valaris Prime, but it's going to take years. The Valari have a long road ahead of them, but there's something more pressing happening." Jake leaned forward. "What's that?" Carter's voice dropped to a whisper, almost as if she were sharing a secret. "We're not the only ones watching the Krathel. Other species have taken notice of what happened here, and not all of them are happy with the way the Krathel operate." Jake's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "A coalition is forming. You saw it yourself. 6 species have already broken from the Galactic Council, and more are likely to follow. The Krathel are losing allies, and they're desperate to maintain their power. But there's another faction. A new player not associated with the Krathel, not even part of the Council. They've been watching us. Watching you." Jake felt a cold chill run down his spine. "A new player? Who are they?" Carter paused, her gaze steady. "They call themselves the Inheritors. They don't trust the Krathel, and they're not keen on the Galactic Council's inaction. They've been building their own fleets quietly in the shadows. And now they're making moves that could shift the entire balance of power in the galaxy." Jake's mind raced. A new faction, one that had been operating in secret. It was a lot to process, especially after the battle they had just fought. But the galaxy had changed, and he could feel it. The tension, the uncertainty, and now, a new threat on the horizon. "They've contacted us," Carter continued. "They want to know where humanity stands in all of this. They've been impressed by your actions, Jake. They've seen that we're not afraid to do what's necessary, even when it's hard." "Are you suggesting we ally with them?" Jake asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. Carter didn't answer directly. "I'm suggesting that humanity's role in the galaxy is no longer just about survival. We have a chance to shape the future, Jake. We've proven ourselves. And I think the Inheritors know that we're more than just an afterthought in galactic politics." Jake exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. It was a lot to take in, too much to comprehend in the aftermath of a battle that had cost so much. But one thing was clear: humanity had been changed by what they had done. The galaxy had been changed. "Admiral," Jake said after a long pause, "what happens now?" "We wait," Carter said softly. "But we're ready. The next chapter of humanity's story is beginning, and it's up to us to decide how we write it." As the screen went dark and the comms cut out, Jake sat back in his chair, his thoughts racing. The galaxy was no longer just a place of exploration and survival for humanity. It was a place where humanity could shape the future. The valiant Dawn had proven that. He looked out the view screen once more at the remains of Valaris Prime. The Valari were gone, but their legacy of friendship, loyalty, and sacrifice would never be forgotten. The human fleet had turned the tide, but now they faced a new and uncertain future. As humanity's actions rippled through the galaxy, the Inheritors watched and the Krathel Dominion faltered. The battle for survival was over, but the true reckoning had just begun. Would humanity rise to meet it, or would the galaxy fall back into chaos? Only time would tell.